Your dad's name.
My dad's name is Alfred Eaton, and my mother's name is Martha Eaton. Her maiden name is Martha Cecil.
Okay. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have two brothers and two sisters.
Could you tell us their names?
Henry Eaton was my older brother. He's deceased. And Mary Booth used to be Eaton. And Benny Eaton and Burl Eaton.
Okay. Who did you marry?
Tom Booth.
Okay. What were your children's names?
My oldest son, his name is Ernie Milton. And then I have Laura Argueta, Diana Williams, Deborah Benito, Christine Milton, Thomas Booth, and LaDonna Booth, and Alfred Eaton, and Matthew Booth.
Okay. Could you tell me what clan that you belong to?
What clan?
You know, the crest.
Eagle.
Crest.
I'm Eagle. Mm-hmm.
Eagle. Okay.
Lachashkiug.
Okay. To me, I guess crest and clan are the same. They both identify. But could you tell me then, what crest do you have a right to use?
I think it's just the Eagle.
Just the
Both my mom and dad were Eagles.
Okay. So. Did you have an Indian name?
No.
No Indian name. Okay. What was the name of your elementary school that you attended?
Metlakatla. Just Metlakatla Elementary.
Okay. Was it a public or a residential school?
I think when I was going to school, it was a territorial school.
Okay.
Government school.
Uh-huh. And so it must be public now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What were your chiefs and the other significant people in your childhood?
During my childhood, we had no Indian culture at all. We didn't know anything about chiefs or clans or crests or anything when we were growing up. So we didn't really get into that until my adult years.
Do any other people stand out in your mind that were kind of important to you as you were growing up?
Can you stop that again for me?
Okay. Could you tell me some stories that you heard about different people when you were young?
Like what kind of people?
Oh, I just asked you a question about how important or significant people that you might remember when you were young. And do you have any stories about them?
My dad used to tell us stories about where he grew up, that if we still lived over in Canada, that we would belong to he would be a chief if we were still living over in Canada. My dad would have been a chief.
Mm-hmm.
So he used to tell us, and that was why we had our ears pierced. He said only people that belonged to royalty, I guess, had their ears pierced, and he used to tell us, that we would have had Indian names if we were over there. And so I guess he belonged to an important family.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the only stories he used to tell us. We didn't really hear too many stories about anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What are your feelings or beliefs about the importance of passing on your language to your children and grandchildren?
I've always felt it to be important, and I worked at the school for about 13 years, I think, helping Arnold Booth with the language, and then eventually worked into me being the teacher of the Tsimshian language, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it's really important that the kids know their own language and, a little bit about it anyway, but it's kind of dying out real fast, and not too many senior citizens left that really speak it fluently. I can speak it, but I can't speak it fluently anymore, and that kind of concerns me. I was talking to Burl the other day, and my sister Burl, that we should start talking to each other in our language, and just keep it in practice.
Okay. Uh, you answered 15 and 16 in one time, so I'll skip the 16. What events happened in school that in your adult life affected your speaking of your language? Did anything ever happen, do you ever remember of anybody stopping you from speaking?
No, what I remember is when we were children, we spoke the language to each other, my brothers and sisters. It was our first language, and in our home, we spoke nothing but Tsimshian to each other. And when I was a child, I remember one time when I first had, found out that not everybody even understood the language. I was just a little girl, and my mom sent us on an errand to go see Jimmy Evans and Minnie, and Jimmy Evans is not a Tsimshian. So we went over to his house. My mom sent us over there to pick up something from Minnie, and I always knew Minnie talked Tsimshian. So my sister and I went over there, and I was the younger one, so my sister pushed me up the steps and told me to go knock at the door, so I knocked at the door, and Jimmy Evans opened the door. So I started rattling off in Tsimshian, telling him what my mom wanted, and he stood there and kind of smiled at me, and he said, "You need to go talk to my wife." He said, "I don't understand your language." And I was really embarrassed, and I got mad at my sister because she was the one that made me go and knock at the door. And that was when I first found out that not everyone in Metlakatla spoke Tsimshian. I don't remember how I learned English because all we ever spoke as children was Tsimshian, and but I don't remember how we ever learned English because my mom didn't speak English that good. She spoke broken, She couldn't speak English. But I remember we used to talk Tsimshian to each other on the school grounds, and I don't know how old I was or what grade I was in, and Benny, and Mary, when we finally noticed, that kids were starting to notice that we didn't speak the same language as them, and they'd stop and watch and listen, and it kind of embarrassed us, I think, and I don't think really ashamed of our language, but we just felt kind of funny being the only ones that spoke it. So we stopped and started talking English to each other, and never spoke Tsimshian to each other anymore. That was in grade school, I remember. So that was where we started breaking away from our language and not using it as much.
Okay, what effect did school have on your life? Could you tell us any stories that show the effect that it had on your life?
School?
Uh-huh.
School was always really important to me. I remember, I graduated as valedictorian or salutatorian, and I was always a bashful person, I wasn't really outgoing or anything, and so I just kind of kept to myself all the time, and school was really important, and I really enjoyed it and got good grades. But I remember when we graduated from 8th grade that we were the first class that couldn't go away to Mount Edgecombe, and that was a big disappointment to me because I really looked forward to leaving Metlakatla, and because Mary and Benny and Henry all went to Mount Edgecombe. By the time we graduated from 8th grade, they had started a high school here, so we were the first freshman class to attend Metlakatla High School. So that's one thing I remember. We never ever got to go away to high school.
Okay. Could you tell me about the town that you were raised in? What can you remember about the town as growing up here?
Metlakatla was always kind of isolated, and everybody was just like one big family. There was no cars, not that many stores, and people all did things together, which you don't see anymore today. There was always activities at the town hall, and we didn't have TV, so people would get together and all get together, there was no different groups like we have now. All the churches would get together at Christmas and different holidays, and people had just had a lot of fun raising money for kids, And that's what I remember because my mom and dad were always busy at the town hall doing fundraisers for different things, March of Dimes and all that kind of stuff. And that's one thing I always remember, and I always tell my kids about, how things used to be, how people stuck together. People still stick together now, but it's kind of spread out, and everybody's in their own little groups, different churches. So that's one thing that I remember about my childhood was how everybody knew everyone, everyone knew when somebody left town, and, now we don't even know who comes and goes, So we were always a close community.
Okay. How about could you tell me about the town in which you spend your adult years? What can you remember about it, and how did you make your living?
I've spent most of my life here in Metlakatla. I lived in Sitka for 3 years when I first got married, working at the hospital there, and it's like a second home to me because it reminds me of Metlakatla. It's a close community too, where people, all stick together, and I really liked it. And then I lived in Seattle for a year to go to school, and those are the only years I've ever spent away from Metlakatla. And my first experience in working on a job was cooking for Head Start. And that was when I first started working and found out that I liked to work with children, and eventually moved over to the elementary school to help Arnold with the language, and I worked there for 13 years. And the reason I quit was because I wasn't getting that much support from administration anymore. It was kind of getting shoved aside, and couldn't get enough interest from the kids anymore. My favorite place to work was elementary, and that was what they took away from me, was working with the elementary kids, and I was only working with junior high and high school, which I didn't enjoy very much because they didn't have the interest, they were only taking it just to...
As a teacher for the language, Sarah, did you find that there was a certain set of kids that picked it up faster than others?
Mm-hmm. I had a handful of kids that I think if they kept on learning it, they would be able to speak the language. And I really enjoyed working with those kids because they took it from kindergarten all the way until they graduated. Mm-hmm. And even now when I see them out, they ask for books, they ask for material, mm-hmm. They want to keep on learning.
Do you find then that all the children that you taught from that age, have any of them used it with you when they've met you again?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of kids that, the main thing that they always remember is how to say hello, and that's in Delaware. And some kids that are, they're not kids anymore, they're grown up, and they still say it when they see me. They say, Delaware, Mrs. Booth, and they still call me Mrs. Booth. Uh-huh. So I've got really close with a lot of kids throughout, all those years, and they still remember, still remember the things I taught, and they make use of them and want to learn more.
Well, do you have any suggestions you might give us, because we're starting to try to learn now? Is there anything that you could pass on to us as we try to put it together, or try to learn, or anything that you might suggest?
I don't know. I think it should be put back into elementary, but they took away the language from teaching it to the elementary kids, and I think it should be brought back. Mm-hmm. Because, I told them before that if they ever did that, I would be willing to go back to work, if I can go and teach kindergarten through 5th or 6th grade. Mm-hmm. Because that's where it really, the kids really learn a lot in the younger. By the time they get to high school, there's so many other things like basketball and all the other stuff that takes up their time, and they lose interest, or they don't really lose interest, they just don't have time for it anymore because the other stuff is more important,
Do you feel, Sarah, that maybe that if we continued with the little children and the parents, if they had their chance to talk it all the time. Do you think that would be kind of the glue that would hold us together, and then the language could probably go on?
Mhm. I had suggested that before because they do that in Prince of Wales and they do it in Canada. They have these, they do have it here, but they don't do it the way they do it in the other villages. They have this like a retreat, they go off to a camping ground somewhere, and it's not just kids and chaperones, it's elders, and the elders speak nothing but their own language, and whether the kids understand it or not, that's all they hear is the Tsimshian language, like for about a week. And whoever knows how to speak the language, they speak it,
Mm.
which is hard to do. I've tried it. Every time I sit with my dad and talk with him, I mix English in with Tsimshian because it's really hard for me to speak fluent Tsimshian anymore. But I've suggested that they do have the camp here, but they do all kinds of other things and spend like an hour trying to teach them the language. But they should do it the whole day, using the language as much as they can so that the kids can hear it, and that's how it's learned. Because that's how we learned it as babies, just hearing it every day, and that was our first language. That's how they do it on the Prince of Wales. The Haidas and the Klunkets do that. They take their kids off to a camping ground for a week, and all the kids hear is Klunket or Haida, whether they understand it or not. And that's how they learn it.
I have to ask this question. I'm asking you questions that aren't even on there now, but I really want to. Your children, do they understand it from your talking it?
I try to teach them little bits and pieces, and my husband tries to learn. He learns from Benny when they go out fishing, and Benny teaches him different words of the fishes and birds and whatever they see, he teaches them. And I try to do that to the kids, like use words like shvat ushalik show up and close the door. They know some stuff like that. And I try to teach them what little that I can.
Okay, Sarah, again, I would like to thank you for allowing us into your home, and I think that this year is going to be a very good tape that the people will really hold on to, because you told us and gave us insight into the language part of our people. And this year draws a close to our interview, and Lugal Toyashin.
Okay, there's one more thing I was going to tell you. My dad and Burl talk Tsimshian to each other all the time, and Carmen and Sabrina and Elizabeth can understand it, so I know it can be done, Even little Elizabeth, my dad, when he tells them to do things, he says it in our language, and they understand what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't speak it, but they can understand it, so I know it can be taught, that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sarah, this draws a close to our interview, and again, we want to thank you for allowing us to come here.